Click on the bill.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to support my caucus colleague's bill, the Property Rights Protection Amendment to the Alberta Bill of Rights. The member for Calgary-Glenmore has worked long and hard for the rights of Albertans. As a farmer and a rancher, he knows full well about the importance of property rights. I'm proud, quite frankly, to be a landowner in Alberta, and I'm concerned about the government's record in the last few years in regards to property rights. I support this bill, Mr. Speaker, because it is doing what should have been done a long time ago. And that, Mr. Speaker, is very simple. It's protecting people's rights to the courts when their land is at risk. The basic of this bill is very simple. If the government passes a law that enables them to take your land or other property, you must get full, fair, and timely compensation for it. If you're not happy with the decision, you have the right to go to the court system. To the average Albertan, and this is the average Albertan, this makes perfect sense. Of course, if someone wants to take your land, they should pay you full price. If you feel like you weren't treated fairly, you can go to the courts. Well, quite frankly, things are a little different here in Alberta. We have to pass this private bill because the government isn't doing its job. Worse, they're the same group that is causing the problem. Now, you want to ask, how are they causing the problem? They're passing bills that put cabinet before everyone else. I believe that we as members are elected to represent, quite frankly, our constituents' views. But I believe in checks and I believe in balances. That's what the courts are for. The bills that they have passed in the last few years, and I mean they, the government, including Bill 24, Bill 36, and Bill 50, puts cabinet ahead of everyone else. Now, I know my constituents in Calgary Fish Creek don't like that, and quite frankly, neither do I. It's sad that the issue of property rights seems distant and remote because, for me, it's very real. As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, I own land in Alberta, and I'm very proud of the land that we own in Alberta. This isn't just about land owned by ranchers and land owned by farmers. It's every homeowner has a stake in this issue. The new power lines that are going through Sherwood Park are going right over in an elementary school. There's an even bigger picture here, and it's not about land. It's about civil rights. It's about your rights as a human being in Alberta. What if one day Cabinet decides that you don't get recourse to the courts on free speech? The reason given by this government, quite frankly, aren't good enough. They just want projects to move faster. It's about convenience. It's like driving through McDonald's drive-thru. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Bill of Rights is there as a check on a government tempted to pass laws that make things easier for them at the expense of individuals' rights. Here's what Premier Lougheed, someone I admire and still admire to this day, said about it here in the House when he was introducing it back on May 12, 1972. The Alberta Bill of Rights restricts the power of the legislature in terms of imposing upon individual rights and freedoms. It establishes a procedure that restrains government from attempting to deprive persons of fundamental rights. Government should do something because it's the right thing to do, not, quite frankly, because it makes their job easier. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've got an election coming up soon. It's kind of like, what's the bill called? The fixed election date. I love that bill. The only one who knows when the election is the government, but yet they want to call it the fixed election date. It would be a lot easier to be in government with all those pesky elections that keep coming up. The premiers, as I said, promised fixed election dates, and we got a fixed election period instead. I, quite frankly, and as my constituents have told me at the doors as I've been door knocking, is quite frankly a pathetic decision. It insults the intelligence of Albertans. Every time the government gets caught doing a poor job of governing, they say the same thing. Trust us. Well, Mr. Speaker, trust is earned. It's based on the past, and it's based on relationships. You can't have a relationship with someone that never listens, tells you you're wrong, and pretends they were right all along when they've changed their mind. Mr. Speaker, it's a recipe for disaster. And that's exactly what we've had over the last few years. Look at the changes at the royalty rates in the oil and gas sector. The government was warned about what would happen if they made drastic decisions. Did they listen? No. They thought they had all the answers. Any criticism was wrong, and it was sour grapes. But you know what? They went ahead and they did it anyhow. And we all know what happened. The oil and gas sector fired thousands of people. The government made change after change until it was back the way it was before. Did the government at any point take responsibility? Now that's a good word, Mr. Speaker, responsibility. Did they ever say they made a mistake and why it happened? Another good point. No, never. No lesson was ever learnt. The government then decided to make changes on the way land was managed and power lines were constructed in Alberta. Did they listen? No, just the same as always. Again, concerned citizens brought legitimate criticisms to the government. Again, the government said, "You're wrong, Albertans. The critics are wrong. Just sour grapes, and you're being afraid." Like a stubborn mule, this government dug in its heels for years. But eventually the truth went out. The government started backtracking, making changes and amendments piece by piece. It was quite a sight to see, Mr. Speaker. For years, people like Keith Wilson had been called a liar and a fearmonger for explaining the government's own lands. Boy, did the government ever change its tune. Why didn't the government get it right and make sure the laws were sound? Because, quite frankly, that's not how they operate. Listening is not what they do. That's what Albertans are supposed to do. It wasn't the government that didn't understand. It was the average Albertan. The government wasn't wrong. You, the people, were. Well, I have a little more faith in the average Albertan than I do, quite frankly, in the government. That's why we need this bill, to keep the government accountable. I say I'm accountable because I listen to my constituents, and as the health critic, I listen to the doctors and people in the healthcare profession. And you know what? Because I've learned why I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, I have finally figured out what the priorities are for Albertans. Governments, Mr. Speaker, that don't listen don't last. I hope that this government listens to the merits of this bill from my honourable colleague and sees the right arguments at the right time. And, Mr. Speaker, I hope they pass Bill 201. Thank you.